So, welcome back. We're going to get going with our final session, which is a second deep dive after the one we just did into the social implications of the energy transition. We're now going to have spend the next hour talking about hydrogen. We've already heard hydrogen, I think, come up several times today. It's, I think, by pretty much everyone today, from industry to policymaker to climate campaigner, considered an indispensable part of getting to net zero, where the discussions arise is over how big a role it should play, in which sectors, how it should be created, where it should come from, and basically what kind of a hydrogen economy do we want, and how do we create it. So the subjects we want to talk about are three elements in that context. I think regulation, infrastructure, and investment are the three pillars that we want to focus on. So to kick us off, we have a three-person panel, two physically present, a third one joining us online. But prior to that, I should say at this point that Kirsten Westphal, who I think is still in the program, is unable to join us in the end, so she unfortunately will not be with us. But to kick us off, we have Mechthild Woersdorfer, who's joining us remotely and will introduce the session with a keynote. I imagine she may be a familiar name to some of you. She is now Deputy Director General for Energy at the European Commission, freshly back in Brussels from the last couple of years spent at the International Energy Agency in Paris, where she coordinated the agency's work on sustainability. And prior to this, she worked at the Commission in various capacities within DG Energy, basically including leading the adoption of the Energy Roadmap for 2050, the Energy and Climate 2030 framework, and also the Clean Energy Package. And she's going to talk to us today about one of the big new developments that we're all waiting for, which is I guess the next part of Fit for 55, but more specifically in the context of hydrogen, the Decarbonizing Gas and Hydrogen Package, which is also due in December. Is Mechthild with us? I imagine she is. Yeah, just because I can't see her. Okay. I think with that, I'd hand over to you, Mechthild. And I know you can't stay with us for the discussion after, but let's see how we do on time. And if it's okay with you, we can always take one or two questions directly to you after you finish, perhaps. But go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to join, unfortunately, from Brussels. Even the sun is shining right now in my office, and not in Berlin, but maybe next time. So thank you very much for the introduction. I was asked, in fact, and I would like to speak about three main developments in that context of European Green Deal, and in particular what we are living now. So I might start with a few words on the energy prices and what's happening right there, but then go, as you suggested, to what the Commission is planning in the decarbonization package for December, and in particular, obviously, on the hydrogen side. So we are witnessing right now and a surge in energy prices, and the Commission is monitoring that very closely. All our member states have been affected, and also some are hit harder than others. It's really a very, very high political issue, and we had only this morning a ministerial meeting in Luxembourg for energy ministers. It was called the extraordinary meeting to discuss what can be done in the short term and what can be done in the medium and long term. And we as the Commission have in that context prepared a communication which we call a toolbox, meaning that in that we are looking at the causes, and I don't want to go into right now why we do have this price surge in energy, gas, but also electricity prices, and in some member states more than in others. So what are the short-term solution, medium and long-term, and how that plays in the European Green Deal and the decarbonization agenda in particular. So after the heads of state and governments last Friday here in Brussels discussed the issue, today in the ministerial meeting we came back, and I would say there is broad agreement on immediate measures, and that is particularly true to protect vulnerable consumers from the rising of energy bills through measures which are mainly coming from member states via direct support, state aid, tax reductions, safeguards, better coordination on energy poverty. The medium and longer term measures were also discussed, and this in our objective is that absolutely key to continue and accelerate everything around the European Green Deal, and in particular the deployment of renewables and energy efficiency, because that obviously has an impact also in the medium and long term on the energy prices. But there's also talks about the electricity market system and the gas market system and low carbon gases. So we are looking and are considering measures right now after the discussion today, and already proposed in our toolbox communication, which I have mentioned. What can we do in terms of gas and gas storage? Is there a need for more effective use of gas storage? Is there a need for a more European approach? And I put that as a question mark. There is not, we will explore that question. And then also, as some other member states have proposed, to explore the benefits of a joint procurement of reserve gas stocks. And that will be done in the next couple of weeks and will be partly part of that regulatory framework for gas and hydrogen, which I will come to in a minute. So as a concrete step from an energy point of view, we have already talked when it comes to the functioning of the electricity and gas markets to our agency, ACER, which is based in Ljubljana, knowing that, and that many member states also underlined in the ministerial meeting today, that the cause of the price surge right now is not our electricity market design. It works well. It has been working well after the last 20 years. So we made that also clear, but we have asked ACER to look at the benefits, but also the drawbacks of the existing market design and come back to us, to the Commission, with some recommendations for April next year, where we look at it from an electricity, but also gas market point of view. A second issue which was discussed, which some member states raised, was not only the functioning of the energy market, but also the carbon market. So we will, as a Commission, task the Energy Market Surveillance and Market Authority to look if there's a need to further enhance the monitoring of developments. And the third element is an investigation in the behavior of some of the supplier. So as in a nutshell, this energy price debate has also triggered, as I said, to look again and even accelerate the Fit for 55 package, which hopes to increase energy autonomy and resilience, but also reducing the dependence on external energy supply and having more own resources like renewables, but also other low carbon resources to be less dependent. So this leads me a bit more to the topic of the session today. What are the main issues in terms of gas and hydrogen, and what is the Commission working on? So just to be clear on the role as we see it of the natural gas also in the next context of 2030, 2050. As we have said in our package for 2030, natural gas plays a role in the transition. But in the future, the gas sector will need to be decarbonized in order to reach climate neutrality by 2050. So natural gas, which is not accompanied by the abatement of its emission, will need to play a decreasing role in the energy mix of member states. And it will be increasingly replaced by renewable and low carbon gases like biomethane, hydrogen, synthetic methane, in line with technological developments. And at the same time, we see a role for coal to gas switch in some regions of Europe, especially in the heating sector. So also natural gas will play a transitional role here in the next couple of years. We should avoid, however, any lock-in effects with this technology. Then let me come to hydrogen. The Commission has started already last year with our hydrogen strategy. So this is a follow-up, if you say, and I know that many member states, including Germany, but others, have also set up hydrogen. In my previous job, as Sonja was mentioning, in the International Energy Agency, I was also in charge, and we published from the IEA side a global hydrogen review where we list all the measures, not only at the European level, but at the global level. And there you can see that Japan, Chile, and many other countries are stepping up their effects, their role on hydrogen. And we see the role of hydrogen at the EU in the context of this ambition to create an integrated energy system to deliver not only an effective, low carbon, but also affordable European economy and energy system. And here, both renewable and low carbon hydrogen can contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emission ahead of 2030 by replacing fossil fuels and feedstocks, in particular in hard to abate sectors like aluminium, chemicals, and others. And it's clear that from an EU point of view, medium to long-term priority is the renewable hydrogen. It has almost no emissions and can play an important role in an integrated energy system by providing flexibility, storage, and buffering options for a renewable-based electricity system. So in that context of the role of gas, hydrogen, we have decided that by mid-December, the Commission will carry out the work on a hydrogen and decarbonized gas markets package, which includes the revision of the gas directive and also the gas regulation. And the aims of that package are twofold. First of all, facilitating the integration of renewable and low carbon gases in the existing gas grid. And this concerns biomethane injected at the distribution level, gas quality in the existing networks, access of renewable gases to LNG terminals, and topics around the integration of network planning between electricity, gas, and hydrogen networks. So we have consulted stakeholders, ENTSO-E, ENTSO-G, and many more on that first objective already. But there's also a second one of our upcoming package, which is enabling a hydrogen market in a dedicated infrastructure, allowing hydrogen to become a key component of the energy sector through creating a regulatory framework for hydrogen networks. Also, that has been discussed in the Madrid Forum stakeholder workshop. There had been an open public consultation. We did an impact assessment. So we are now in the last stage, if I may say so, on drafting the legislative proposal. And what I mentioned in the beginning, giving the high attention and the political context of the high gas prices, we might consider not only the decarbonization of the gas, the hydrogen market, but also a few elements looking and explore ideas of gas storage and joint purchasing in the context of the security of supply. Let me just add one final word on hydrogen, and in particular on renewable hydrogen, which is the debate which we have right now already when it comes to our renewable directive, which focuses on the targets for renewable hydrogen to send investors a strong signal that green fuels are needed to lead the industry and transport sectors towards climate neutrality. So in that renewable context, we extend the existing rules to the promotion of renewable fuels of non-biological origin. And we introduce, and that is for debate right now with the European Parliament and Council, for industry, a binding target of 50% of hydrogen consumption, and for the transport sector, a target of 2.6% of energy consumption. There's also a proposal which maintains the criteria of additionality, which should be applied for all hydrogen uses, which will be developed also as part of a delegated act before the end of the year. And finally, this proposal extends the certification framework and the associated database used for certifying and enabling the tracing of liquid and gaseous transport fuels to all renewable fuels, including renewable hydrogen. So we will address the issue of low carbon decarbonization as part of the hydrogen and gas decarbonization package, and that low carbon certification of hydrogen will be based on a similar EU-wide criteria as the renewable hydrogen, considering the life cycle emissions as well as sustainable criteria. So we see a future, at least in the next couple of years, to stepping up and create the right markets. I think that's the necessity for also deploying more renewable and low carbon hydrogen in Europe, in line with our hydrogen strategy. But we are obviously looking at also at partners, because part of that will be imported from third countries. So there is also a lot of the debate, not only in the EU context, but we also part of an international agenda with other partners where we will discuss this issue. So thank you very much for the attention right now. And I have a few minutes left if ever there are questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mechthild. Are there questions from anyone in the room or anyone online? Online, you can send them in via the Zoom chat if there is one. Yeah, that's quite a technical question, though. I'm not sure Mechthild's going to be able to answer that on the spot. Mechthild, I think I'll leave you to get back to Alessandro bilaterally, perhaps, on his questions. I had one question, if there are none, which is, I guess one of the purposes of the December gas package is also to sort out what we do with low carbon hydrogen or blue hydrogen, since, as you say, renewable hydrogen has been incorporated or addressed by the Renewable Energy Directive. Does the Commission foresee any public support for blue or low carbon hydrogen as a transition solution? Do you know? And to what extent will you support that, as opposed to the renewable side of it?
I mean, the difference between the renewables, where we definitely in the renewable context and in the targets we have set here for up to 40% of renewables by 2030, we only include renewable hydrogen. So that's clear. We had that debate right now in the Parliament. When it comes to the next package, it's low carbon hydrogen. And when we look at the different scenarios, including IRENA, by the way, in a 2050 context, we probably need both. We need renewables hydrogen, but also hydrogen, as we call it, blue, combined with CCS or CCUS. In Europe, it will be mainly renewable, but we cannot exclude that there's also a need, certainly, as I said, in hard to abate sector, in energy intensive sector, in long distance transport sector, that it might be needed that we also use blue hydrogen. Let's not also forget that for now, we have basically hydrogen based on fossil fuels. So there's a huge step to be taken, which involves a lot of renewables if we only want to go for renewable hydrogen. So we are open and will define it a bit more clearly in our package, that we also include other forms, which we call then low carbon hydrogen.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question? I don't think so. So I'll ask a final one then. Can you, you mentioned also in the context of the delegated act, the conditions around additionality. What I understand when I when I speak to people in the hydrogen sector, that this is really crucial or at the center point for making the case for renewable hydrogen. So can you say anything more about the latest status of that? And I guess how flexible is the Commission prepared to be to I guess on additionality to enable the hydrogen market to start up? You have two extremes. Some people say, let's be very flexible, let's get it going. And then at the other extreme, you have those who say, okay, we should not compromise on environmental integrity from the start. So how do you kind of see that debate at the moment, and how do you hope or imagine it finishing?
So it's really one of the key issues of the debate. We have made our proposal on this additionality, and I think for the time being we stick to it. I think we definitely need all our renewables for the electricity, for new uses, and for hydrogen. So we need this additionality as a principle. There's a certain flexibility in the negotiations, but it's too early to say in which direction it will go. But I think there will be a compromise at the end to really accommodate these two parts, as you mentioned it.
Okay, if you have time for one more question, one has come in from Pere Margalaf Valdeperez, who's one of the speakers in our hydrogen panel in a moment. Pere, are you already online? Would you like to ask your question in that case?
Yes, I do. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, a little. Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So it's regarding the low carbon hydrogen that we were referring to. We always talk about blue hydrogen, but there is also a lot of development on turquoise hydrogen from the technology space. And, you know, I think it's very promising, methane pyrolysis, but the problem will become if we start producing a lot of turquoise hydrogen, we'll have the carbon black, or black carbon, that of course it's much easier to handle than gaseous CO2. But have you guys started talking about how to handle that byproduct, how to treat that carbon black? How are we going to dispose it? Where are we going to dispose it? There is already a market because there is a use for this type of materials for construction or tires. But it may happen that we overwhelm that market, saturate that market very soon. So have you started discussions? Should we look at this technology, or we should be more cautious because the problem on the carbon black has not been tackled yet?
So if I may, I think we have been looking at it, and it's part of the discussion right now, how and if it will be included in the decarbonization package. So we don't say right now it's only red and blue hydrogen. We are quite open. For the time being, we are in the stage of defining that low carbon, but there are discussion also around the turquoise and the utility of it, but there's no final decision yet how we will integrate it.
Okay, thank you. And with that, thank you very much, Mechthild, for your time this afternoon. A round of applause.
Thank you very much, and have a good panel debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, she's already been with us for quite a moment. I only saw it come in later. But it's from the same person who asked a couple of questions earlier, so I hope she will follow up with him bilaterally. We continue then with the rest of our speakers, and I'd like to, well, maybe I'll introduce each of you briefly and then hand over to Volker to start. Volker Trepte, so in the middle, a partner for energy, utility and resources at PwC in Germany. And he's been with PwC since the early 90s and working on energy issues and around the energy industry for the last 20 years. And then next to me, Rainer Block, who's CEO of the Industry Service Division at TÜV Süd. And that means he's also the person coordinating all of the company's work around hydrogen. And he's here to talk about the role of certification, notably in bringing forward the hydrogen market. And finally, you've already met him, Pere Margalef Valdeperez, Senior Vice President, Technology Officer for Hydrogen at SNAM. SNAM, Europe's second largest regulated utility, the Italian gas TSO, one of the 5 largest industrial companies in Italy. And Pere previously worked at Fuel Cell Energy, so again has a history in hydrogen. I'd like to turn to you first, Volker, to, I guess, give us your perspective on what's needed now, also on the back of what Mechthild said, to get the European and ultimately international hydrogen economy up and running.
Thanks, and thanks for having me here. And I think it was a good start that one of the points was regulation. I think when we're discussing how to develop a hydrogen market, it will not develop really quickly if we don't really help to give for me it's 4 really elements which we need to address and which we need there. And I think the first one, what we're discussing there, and sometimes the regulation is missing it a little bit, it's creating the demand. if we don't have a demand, building up infrastructure and all those things, so we don't have the market. And I think then we have to focus on which industries. Is the energy intensive industries like steel, cement, chemicals, so how to really bring them up on a certain place to build up a market and demand there. And I think it will perhaps not be only one company, it will perhaps be a cooperation of different companies with local transportation, heating, and one perhaps chemical company who takes the hydrogen, and then perhaps you will also to start to sell the oxygen on the production. I think that's something you need to build up to be competitive in the pricing. So if there's no real good pricing, then you won't find any company who's willing to pay a fortune for green hydrogen when they can put the price up to their customers, or they have other subsidies on this one. And I think that's really important. And then they're looking to the supply on the other side, so how we get the supply. And I think we all know in Germany we will have supply from outside. We need to import it. And I think the most important thing, how we get supply of hydrogen, green hydrogen, where the price difference to fossil fuels is minimum. So how we can reduce the price difference. At the moment it's too high, it's relatively high, so how we can reduce it. And there are two ways. Either you get renewable electricity, cheap and long term, so offshore wind or whatever you can import and take this one, or then you have to look on importing green hydrogen from other countries. And I think that's also a discussion. You have to look not only where to produce it's also the transportation is really important. And important was also on the speaker before when we're talking about the social aspect, and also you have to think about when you're buying green hydrogen from other countries. So how politically stable is it? How's the environment there? How's the social aspects and all this? That you have to think about. But then you have to find long-term resources where you then get import green hydrogen to really start a market. And I think the discussion before was really interesting too. Because we should start not only with green hydrogen, we should start to trade on hydrogen. So take all the sources we can get on hydrogen, have a volume which we can trade, and then have the next step going then to green hydrogen. So start with a bigger volume and then go with the decarbonization of the hydrogen as total. And that might perhaps also be easier to ramp up the market, because if we don't have the volumes and then we don't have the traded volumes in certain hubs or certain areas, then we wouldn't have a market. And then I think we need a market if we really believe that there will be traded hydrogen on a European and global level. And transport and storage, I think, yes, it's really important. It was addressed before. We have to find a way how to transform gas grid to hydrogen grids. I think it might be too expensive to just double both grids, have a hydrogen and gas grid. I think then we have to have a transition, and also from the regulation, we have to have a view how this is really addressed and priced. And we have to also be honest, if we have production in the Middle East or Africa or wherever, in green hydrogen, and if we have no intelligent solution how to transport it, then we will have at the end, we start with green hydrogen in the Middle East, and when it's here, it's great, because the transport CO2 emissions are so high that it's really then transformed back to gray. So that's also some ideas we have to address there, and being honest and not saying we're building up there a production of green hydrogen and suddenly it's here. So no, we have to get it there, either pipelines or transportation. And it's not so easy to, like, you have to build new ships or a new engine on ships to get it really to have green transportation. I think that's the biggest issue they have to think about. And coming to the end is the regulatory framework. And I think that's really important to be really give a long-term stable environment to attract investors. So if you invest in hydrogen or an electrolyzer, you want to have over 20 or 25 years, you want to have stable income. You want to meet what you invest, and you want to know how the income is, and there's a stable, and the environment should be able. So saying like, yeah, and the regulatory we see about, and it's flexible and it's changing, no, it doesn't help you as an investor, a company. You want to have stable income. And I think also addressing like the certification. I think with Stolle morning, he addressed it. I think we had something like a project with Dana and WEC on certification. There are so many certifications in the market. If you want to sell hydrogen to a customer, to an industry company, they need the certification which is needed in their territory to have the footprint, the CO2 footprint for them, for their agenda. And I think that's really important to have the right tool. So if you do it, I think then you will see perhaps in the next years, and we invest, I think personally also in all hydrogen, not only focus in the first step on green. We will see some islands or some hubs starting up where trade begins in certain areas, perhaps North and Western Europe, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, this angle where perhaps the first trades start building up, and then perhaps we see then the market growing up with the volumes. And you see already that the Rotterdam Exchange announced that they want to trade hydrogen. We have other companies that are already announcing or discussing that they want to publish price indices for hydrogen in the market. So we see already starting something to building up to see like how the pricing works. If this goes, I think it's really a potential for us to really increase the market. But honestly, it has to be competitive in pricing.
Yeah. Just coming back to what you started with on the demand side, so you were saying, where do you see the greatest potential to build up demand in the beginning? Because on the one hand, the volumes, as you said, are an industry, but the margins are probably more in, you know, in other sectors like transports, potentially.
We would see like in the beginning, we would see like that it starts up in companies and chemicals or steel production. So because in the industry where they are able to, hopefully also with green steel or green products, with special chemical products, where perhaps you can have a price increase on selling these products, and then they are able to pay the premium. But then we're analyzing at the moment that then with in this area to building a hub or an island, the UN will attract other partners like local transportation and others who then will get there, and then if you take all together, the pricing will also be lower. I think that will be the start.
And to what extent then in terms of stimulating demand, how useful is, I mean, the European Commission's Fit for 55 proposal for the new Renewable Energy Directive? It proposes a 50% target for industrial hydrogen to be renewable. I mean, is that the kind of support you say is a real game changer potentially, or how important is that?
It's a game changer only if you do subsidizing it, or then the science-based targets of the companies force them also to do that. If they have a CO2 agenda and a transformation roadmap and they have to invest, then they need to switch. I think that's one part, but also they have to think about how clever you can support it financially by the government or by the European Union. But not as we did perhaps in the days before in other renewable energies. We have to do it really wise and really where it makes sense. It will not make sense to invest or subsidize an electrolyzer somewhere in southern Germany where no big demand is. So we have to look where's the demand, and I think that will be crucial.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Let's turn to Rainer Block then. Certification is your speciality, and I mean, Volker mentioned it, and I think also Mechtil did as well. I guess how far have we come with this, and explain to us exactly why it's so important to realize a hydrogen market, and how do we certify all these different types of hydrogen that we increasingly talk about?
Thank you for having me here. I try to explain a quite complex system, and I hope a very easy way. But maybe one remark before, the World Hydrogen Council, the World Energy Council, sorry for that, recently issued a interesting study on different hydrogen strategies of countries in the world. And we have, if I'm not wrong, around 30 countries in the world with a dedicated hydrogen strategy, so also the EU. And why are they doing that? So we have industrial countries, we have the emerging countries, for a quite simple fact. We want to use hydrogen as a storage media, first, second, transport media, and third, for decarbonization of different sectors. So we have producing, exporting countries, and we have importing countries. So everybody can imagine what only it means to decarbonize a steel plant by green hydrogen, what tremendous amount of hydrogen we need. And all players are aware of the fact that we need in Europe, in US, the import of hydrogen. Second, we all mentioned already some different colors of hydrogen. That's nice, but actually it's important the footprint of 1 ton of hydrogen, the CO2 footprint. And to make it even more complex, as you already mentioned, this footprint is developing along the supply chain, because you can have a perfectly green produced hydrogen from water plant, you pack it into a trailer, and then you transport it for only 250 kilometers, and then it turns to gray. So I have prepared some slides to make it hopefully a little bit easier, because it's really not easy to understand this system. We have the so-called certify system. This is a scheme for certification, and we can directly go to the next slide for just illustrate what means actually hydrogen and the different roles of hydrogen. So we have on the left, number one, the power generation of hopefully renewables, but that could be also nuclear or any other source of energy. Then we have to distribute the energy, and here is already where hydrogen comes into the place as a storage media of renewable or any other energy. And then we have predominantly 4 sectors. This is decarbonization of transportation. We expect that beside of the battery electric vehicles, especially for the heavy trucks, there will come hydrogen and fuel cell in place very soon. Then we have to decarbonize the industrial energy. By the way, we know that just for decarbonization of the German chemistry, it would take the same amount of electricity production we have actually today, just for one sector. Then we have the steel plants, we have glass industry, we have all these high temperature industries. Third, it's also interesting figuring out building heat and power. We have already manufacturer providing fuel cells for household appliance. And third is then serving as a feedstock. This is the so-called green fuels, and especially for the aircraft. So it's hard to find a plane running on batteries for more than a couple of 100 kilometers. So we need or hydrogen planes, or we need green kerosene. So, and now we come to the certify system and to certification in the next page. Could we have the next slide, please? Yes. We have always to differentiate the so-called well-to-gate and well-to-wheel balance. Certify is doing 2 important things. First is to identify dedicated production units and to identify the amount of green hydrogen produced at this site. Second, for not having double counting, we need a register. And this is actually the trick, so you can buy your hydrogen at one place and you can produce it at quite another place. So the boundary of this certify system is the well-to-gate. So from production to the pipeline or to the ship or to the trailer. And this is already a very, very nice system. We have also for the CO2 emissions in place in the European Union for all industries like the steel industries who have the obligation to have their CO2 certificates in place. There comes the environmental verifier on site, is checking what is the amount of their CO2, what they're emitting, and after that you got registered with that. And this is the other way around. We have then dedicated green hydrogen sources, and this is the so-called guarantee of origin. And this is then registered in a system where you can guarantee that you have not the double counting effect. Just last slide, we see we can do that for the green hydrogen as well as for the low carbon hydrogen, because the one important number is the 91 gram CO2 equivalent. And this is actually this is a benchmark for gray hydrogen. And if you have then a reduction of around 60%, then we talk about green hydrogen, if this comes from renewable energies, or low carbon hydrogen, if that comes from other sources.
Mm-hmm. And presumably you could introduce, going back to the nuclear question, you can introduce new guarantees or new categories again for nuclear produced hydrogen, or the pyrolysis turquoise hydrogen.
It's already induced, it's the low carbon hydrogen.
Okay, all of those fall under the low carbon hydrogen.
Yeah, because actually it's always important that you have a fixed boundary. Mm-hmm. If do you count, for example, the CO2 footprint of the production units or not?
Yeah.
And do you count the feedstock and so on? And if you have this boundary is fixed, then any energy source is welcome. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, I think, for a good explanation of how far we've got with certification. Right. One of the other bits of the puzzle then is, of course, the infrastructure to be able to get hydrogen from where it's produced to where it's consumed. And Pere, I think you're probably in the best position to talk about that. As I said, he's from SNAM, so infrastructure provider. I guess the question to you is, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of investments, and how do we get them, will we need to be able to ultimately move hydrogen around and put it to productive use?
Can you hear me well?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, I changed my microphone, so hopefully you can hear me better than before. So thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be here. For those of you who don't know SNAM, SNAM is the Italian gas TSO on the transportation side, not on the distribution side. So everything I'm going to explain today is on transportation side, and I cannot speak on the distribution natural gas grid. SNAM started a little bit earlier than anyone, thinking of hydrogen as the future energy carrier. Our CEO, Marco Berà, has been vetting and actually investing a lot of energy and money on hydrogen because he's a true believer, and that's why he built a hydrogen business unit within SNAM, which we are about 50 people right now, fully dedicated to hydrogen projects. I will go on that in a second. But to answer your question, on the infrastructure side, we started a few years ago exploring and looking at analyzing our pipelines on the transportation side. And we realized that about 70% of our pipes are already hydrogen ready. Of course, there is a 30% that needs to be retrofit or needs to be changed, but a big percentage of our hydrogen, of our pipelines that today are transporting methane are already hydrogen ready, according to the ASME B3112 standard, which is the only standard today that works on that talks about transportation of hydrogen. Of course, we are working with CEN to define new standards, but that's on the pipeline side. We can assert that most of it is ready. Of course, SNAM infrastructure is not pipelines. There are other pieces of the puzzle, like the compressors. We have compression stations along Italy that basically build the pressure to be transport and regulates the pressure to be used of this gas. And we test our compressors with a blend, not with 100% hydrogen, of course, but we also realized that about a blend of 10% hydrogen, 90% methane is already can be already used in our existing compression stations. More work has to be done on this, and we will have to develop compressors that will be able to compress higher percentages of volume of blending of hydrogen and methane, and eventually, finally, hopefully, 100% hydrogen. But already we can use a mix, a blend of 10% hydrogen, 90% methane, which it's already a lot of hydrogen. On the storage side, which is another piece of the puzzle that belongs to the hydrogen, to a SNAM infrastructure, as you guys may know, we own already a lot of underground storage facilities for methane. We know that we could blend hydrogen and natural gas of about 2%. That's no problem, and we tested that in our underground facilities. And we have about 20 billion cubic meters underground storage capacity for methane, which could be retrofit for hydrogen eventually. And we're carrying on testing and research with the Politecnico di Torino currently, just to try to understand how much more hydrogen we can blend with the natural gas, and if eventually we can use the full storage capacity to store hydrogen, which of course that's going to be down the road many years ahead, because we don't have the need today to store much hydrogen, but in the future hopefully we will need to use these facilities to store hydrogen, and that will become a very valuable asset. We're also working on meters. We're involved in several projects. Today there is a need, of course, of equipment of developing meters that can handle blends of natural gas and hydrogen within our grids, and eventually pure hydrogen. And then I think very importantly, SNAM has been very active with final users, and I think that's very important. We've been working with industrial users, trying to help them understand and become believers that hydrogen is something that they can use to replace natural gas. And I'm talking about thermal usage. For instance, we have the project, the Contursi project, that was announced a few years ago, where we tested a blend of hydrogen and natural gas in a pasta factory. That 10% was injected in a natural gas pipeline that belonged to SNAM, and then we tested that blend of hydrogen and methane into one of their steam generators, and the test was very successful. Now, also with the steel manufacturers, we tested up to 30%, not 10%, but 30%, and we're working on projects to basically test 100% hydrogen at the industrial level. And I think that's very important, and I think that's what I think SNAM is I personally think it's doing a good job. Of course, we're looking at our infrastructure. Of course, we're retrofitting our infrastructure. We're investing, and that's what's needed. But we also, and that may answer a few questions from before, what do we need? We also need to help the final users understand that hydrogen is safe, that hydrogen can be used, and it can be a replacement of natural gas. And SNAM is doing it, and I encourage all the utilities that eventually have a stake on energy to do the same. So that's on SNAM level. We're very active, not just in Italy, but internationally. We're expanding also in the US. We're looking at other regions in China and India, etc. But of course, in Italy, we're extremely active.
What would you say is the biggest challenge you face on the infrastructure front? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of work underway from your work on compressors, meters, working with final consumers, industries. What's the biggest? I mean, what's most difficult for you at the moment?
Well, to find the hydrogen. So
Good answer. Good answer.
yes, because we're talking about megawatts and gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity to be needed in the future, but okay, who's going to build this and where the renewables will be built and who's going to build those renewables? So we're talking about mesmerizing numbers, and paper holds everything, right? You can put a paper, you can put in a slide all these big numbers, but in my opinion, the biggest challenge is, okay, once we convince the final users through regulation or through social pressure or economics, hopefully in the future, we'll build up some regulation that economics will help hydrogen.
Yeah.
We need to produce that hydrogen, so I think it's going to be challenging.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions that came in around that. So the original question we had while Mechthild was talking, which was about capacity factors and electrolyzer hours and so on. But I think what it boils down to is this question, which always comes up of, can we, where's it going to come from? Can we ever build enough renewables to actually, you mentioned too the magnitude of the volume challenge, can we ever build enough renewables to really fuel a hydrogen economy? And Volker, maybe I'm going to come back to you on that. The nuclear question is again about, is that not a source of supply? And then there's a question that came in specifically about if we're talking about imports. Africa, lots of people have no energy access, electricity access so far, and we're talking about building renewables with a view to creating green hydrogen, to then exporting that. So how do we square that with Africa's own priorities, notably in terms of development? So these are all kind of issues around supply, and I guess the development dimension is a particular part of that as well. Do you want to come back on those questions?
I think we will be in the end. There will be a huge competition on green hydrogen because the resources on the production of renewable energy production for green hydrogen will be also limited. So we will look well around where we find one, but I think it's at the moment I don't see at the moment enough capacity currently and coming up so quickly that you would really be able to feed all potential needs of green hydrogen. And then that comes to the discussion on yellow hydrogen from nuclear. So that's a long discussion also in the EU. I think friends and others would like to see it as a topic, as a green one. So that would be like help to increase it. And there's a lot of discussion, like in Russia has a discussion, they are aiming that it's green energy for them. It's nuclear, it's green because it's CO2 free. And I think we need all sources to build it up. And I think that's quite complicated and I think quite challenging to get the needs, as you said, when you're looking on the chemical industry, how much need there is on electricity. And I think we cannot source it, we have to import it, but also others will import it. So there will be a shortage in competition.
I guess the nuclear discussion is basically the same discussion or a parallel discussion to how to treat nuclear in the context of the green investment taxonomy, which has also been postponed so far and is ongoing. How does nuclear
it's the same discussion, exactly. The same solution you will need to get on Europe level or international level in this topic.
Exactly. And on Africa, I mean, we do talk a lot about imports. We heard earlier, Germany expects to import most of its hydrogen. Can we, or should we even be having a conversation about importing green hydrogen from Africa with energy poverty the way it is in Africa?
As my understanding, as far as if you import green hydrogen, the green hydrogen needs to be produced by green electricity, renewable electricity, which is in excess of the energy needed in the environment. So you can just take the green energy, electricity out of the market and then they have no energy anymore, electricity, and then just export it. So there is a certain certification discussion about it because it's a long discussion you have. It's just not only how the green electricity is produced, it's how you get water, how the environment, how the labor, how you really build up the infrastructure there. I think it's too short just to discuss only it's Morocco or whatever country taken Africa, it's just green. There's PV plants and then we produce it, take all the energy out of the country and then we export it to Europe. That's not a solution. I think on certification, you need to have built up the whole infrastructure and you need to have reliable long-term relationships and contracts which you all so safe that they will be on both sides will follow these contracts. And I think that makes it not so easy at the end to contract with everyone in the world to purchase green hydrogen. And I think that's something you have to look on the full ESG agenda, let's say. It's not only the E part, it's also the S and G part you need to look on if you import green hydrogen in the end.
Rainer, do you want to come back on that? And there was a specific question too about the certification, whether that should apply just to European production or also to imports.
I've seen the question. I can say this certify scheme could be applied worldwide. So this is just a scheme for guarantee of origins and to register. It's always, the players have to come together to agree on some kind of system. Let me please give one remark on what you mentioned about Africa. We shouldn't underestimate the stabilizing effect of this hydrogen economy. First, we have these traditional states like Saudi Arabia and all others depending 100% on oil. And they have already realized that they have to switch to renewable and to hydrogen. So this is actually a big chance for these countries to further having export goods. And the same is true what you asked for the subsidies in Europe. We have with the Green Deal, we have enormous subsidies, and we have these so-called IPCEI projects. This is international projects of common European interest. In my opinion, this is a huge chance for Europe to come together, because it's the same in Europe as we're discussing worldwide. We can produce the hydrogen in the North Sea wind park as well as in the Spanish or Italian photovoltaic plants. And there are already projects in the pipeline which come very soon true, where you can deliver the green hydrogen from Spain through existing pipelines to the heart of Europe. And this is a real stabilizing effect for the European economy.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah. Is there a final question from anyone? Okay. Do you want to?
I think that TÜV has to make sure that there will be no chaos in the market in the future when we talk about free trade, which means that every molecule that is essentially decarbonized needs to be certified as decarbonized and green, whether it comes from renewables or whether it's a blue or whether it comes from nuclear energy or in future, which will take a couple of more years, from pyrolysis. I didn't see that in your certification yet, but imagine that if molecules are marked yellow and green and blue, there is no free trade possible. You see that's not possible. You can't do that. So will you drive as for making sure that once it's green, no matter where it's come from in terms of renewable or CO2-free energy?
Right.
Right?
So, thank you for your question. This is actually what I'm always mentioning. We shouldn't talk about these colors. We should talk about the dedicated carbon footprint of a ton of hydrogen. And so if we have always the same boundary and the same balancing system, then you can perfectly combine the hydrogen of different sources. And this is the case when we're talking about large amounts of hydrogen in pipelines. And this is actually the same as for renewable energy. You also cannot paint the electrons green. For that reason, you always need this guarantee of origin. for having the dedicated resources and making sure that there's no double counting.
From what I understood, there's two categories at the moment, the renewable hydrogen and then the low carbon, which encompasses all of these other categories. So there's two for the moment.
But this works only as long as you really focus on the carbon footprint on hydrogen. If you go political on green and low carbon, then you start with a mess. And then if other countries will not accept yellow as green, and then
we have one final question, because you had your hand up at the same time. Try and make it short. I'll repeat it. Don't worry. I'll repeat it. Yeah. Okay, so two questions for those of you online from a representative from the BDEW, representing the German energy and water industries here in Germany, both to SNAM, to Perry. So one, talk about blending. What if consumers ultimately want pure methane or pure hydrogen? How does that work then? Do you separate them out again at some point? And secondly, are you ready for large volumes of green hydrogen to be imported via Italy to other industrial consumers in Germany, for example? Are you working on that and working with other governments to be able to accommodate that type of import? And you're going to have to be relatively brief, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. So on the first one, yes, that's a very good question, and we're working on membranes technology, but also on electrochemical hydrogen separation technologies. We're enabling and funding R&D. We're also helping companies and startups that are developing this type of technologies. So yes, we're working on that because we understand that some customers will not want a blend or cannot use a blend. And that's probably most important. They may not be able to use a blend. So we're working on that. And there are different technologies and solutions to do this, no problem. On the second questions, yes, of course, this is a very, Italy is in a very strategic location, of course, because it connects the north of Africa with the north of Europe. So we are in a very privileged position in that. We understand that this comes also with a lot of responsibility, and we have to accommodate and allocate this and promote this new reality that's coming in the future. So we're working with the Northern Africa countries. We're working in Morocco. We're working with Tunisia. We're working in Egypt, and we're working on a lot of countries down there. But also working with Germany as well, because as you guys can understand, our position makes us crucial for this. So we are ready, and we will be ready, but we also are realistic, and we don't think that these large volumes of hydrogen from North Africa will come to Europe or Germany through Italy, at least in 10-15 years or more. So this is not something that's going to happen in 2020, according to our view. But we'll be there when that's needed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And we're going to have to wrap up the panel to accommodate our final speaker. So a big round of applause to our final 3 speakers. Thank you very much.